The glowing sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Boise, Idaho territory, as Willa Sutton stood on the porch of the general store, watching the last customers drift away into the gathering dusk. At 32 years of age, with the harsh realities of frontier life etched into her once smooth features, Willa had long ago resigned herself to a life of solitude and hard work. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new century still seemed as distant as her faded dreams of love and family. "You closing up soon, Willa?" called Mrs. Patterson, the elderly wife of the town's only doctor, as she shuffled past with her basket of purchases. "Just as soon as I sweep the porch, madam," Willa replied, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The store had been her life for the past 5 years, ever since her father had passed and left her the family business. Before that, she'd helped him run it while caring for her ailing mother until consumption had taken her 3 years prior. Willa ran her hands down the front of her simple blue calico dress, smoothing invisible wrinkles. Her honey-brown hair was pulled back into a practical bun at the nape of her neck, a few tendrils escaping to frame her face. Time hadn't been unkind to her, but the harsh Idaho sun had left fine lines at the corners of her eyes and mouth. Not that it mattered much anymore. In Boise, unmarried women her age were considered firmly on the shelf, destined for spinsterhood. As the last of the light faded from the sky, Willa lifted the broom and began to sweep, the rhythmic sound accompanying her wandering thoughts. There had been a time when she'd dreamed of a husband, children playing in a yard of their own. But fate had other plans. First, there was her duty to her parents. Then, when she might have had a chance at courting, the war came and took most of the eligible men away. Those who returned often sought younger wives who could give them many children, not a woman approaching middle age with calloused hands and practical sensibilities. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. A lone rider approached, his silhouette outlined against the darkening sky. Willa paused, broom in hand, watching as the stranger drew closer. Travelers weren't uncommon in Boise, situated as it was along the Oregon Trail, but something about this rider caught her attention. He rode tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders squared against the evening chill. As he came into the pool of light cast by the store's front lanterns, Willa could see he was perhaps a few years older than herself, with sun-bronzed skin and a neatly trimmed beard shot through with strands of silver. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the large bundle secured behind his saddle suggested he'd been traveling for some time. The stranger pulled his horse to a stop in front of the store, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Evening, madam. Might I trouble you for directions to the Sherman boarding house? I hear Mrs. Sherman takes in boarders, and I'm looking for a place to stay." "You're in the right place, sir," Willa replied, setting the broom aside. "Mrs. Sherman's is just 2 blocks down and 1 over to the right. You'll recognize it by the blue shutters and the big oak tree in the yard." The man nodded his thanks, but made no move to continue on his way. Instead, he studied her face for a moment longer than was strictly polite. "Forgive me, but would you happen to be Miss Sutton?" Willa stiffened slightly. "I am. Have we met before, Mr. Kent?" "Kieran McCoy." He dismounted in one fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. "And no, madam, we haven't had the pleasure. But I know your cousin, Elizabeth Sutton. She and I crossed paths in Denver last month." Willa's expression softened at the mention of her cousin. "Lizzie, how is she?" "Doing well. She speaks very highly of you." Kieran McCoy reached into his saddlebag and carefully extracted a small wooden box. "In fact, she insisted I deliver this to you should my travels bring me through Boise." Willa accepted the box with curious hands. The delicate scent of cinnamon and apples wafted up as she lifted the lid to reveal a perfectly baked pie, somehow intact despite the journey. She remembered, Willa murmured, a genuine smile warming her features for the first time that day. Apple pie with cinnamon was always our favorite as girls. She mentioned something about a promise made long ago, that you'd share a pie again someday, Kieran offered, his deep voice gentle in the quiet evening. Willa nodded, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. When we were girls, before her family moved to Denver, we made a pact over apple pie that we'd never let life's disappointments embitter us. She laughed softly, the sound rusty from disuse. I fear I haven't kept that promise as well as I might have. Well, perhaps it's not too late to remember it, Kieran suggested, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. Your cousin also mentioned you might be willing to point me toward any work in town. I'm handy with horses, decent with carpentry, and looking to put down some roots after too many years on the move. Willa studied the stranger with renewed interest. There was something steady in his gaze, something reliable in the set of his shoulders that spoke of a man who knew hardship but hadn't been broken by it. As it happens, Mr. McCoy, Boise is growing fast. Several of the ranches outside town are looking for experienced hands, and Mr. Jensen at the livery mentioned just yesterday he's looking for help. She hesitated, then added, and if you're truly skilled with carpentry, I could use some repairs here at the store. The back storeroom shelves are falling apart, and the front steps need replacing before someone breaks an ankle. I'd be happy to take a look, he offered. Perhaps tomorrow, if that suits. That would be fine, Willa agreed, suddenly aware that darkness had fully fallen and she was standing alone with a stranger. Proper as their conversation had been, it wouldn't do to give the town gossips something to talk about. I open at 7. I'll be here at 7:30 then, after you've had time to get the day started, Kieran said, remounting his horse with practiced ease. Thank you for the directions, Miss Sutton, and for considering me for the work. As he turned his horse toward Mrs. Sherman's boarding house, he paused. Your cousin also asked me to deliver a message along with the pie. Willa raised an eyebrow. Oh, she said to tell you that sometimes second chances come when we least expect them, and that it's never too late for promises to be fulfilled. He touched the brim of his hat again. Good night, Miss Sutton. Good night, Mr. McCoy, Willa replied, watching as he rode away, the pie box clutched in her hands like an unexpected gift. That night, after locking up the store and retiring to her small apartment above it, Willa sat at her kitchen table and cut herself a slice of Lizzie's pie. The sweet, spiced flavor transported her back to her youth, to summer days spent with her cousin, planning their futures with all the certainty of the young. Back then, they had been so sure of what life would bring them, husbands who adored them, homes filled with children's laughter, a sense of purpose and belonging. Lizzie had found those things. Her letters, infrequent as they were, spoke of her happiness with her banker husband and their 4 children. But for Willa, those dreams had slowly faded, replaced by the reality of the store ledgers, the endless cycle of ordering supplies, stocking shelves, and minding the till. Sometimes second chances come when we least expect them, she murmured to herself, repeating Kieran McCoy's message. Was that why Lizzie had sent him, pie in hand, to her door? It seemed too calculated for coincidence, too deliberate to be chance. Willa shook her head, amused at her own fanciful thinking. More likely, her cousin had simply been kind to a traveler, learned he was heading toward Boise, and seized an opportunity to send a nostalgic gift. Nothing more. Still, as she prepared for bed, she found herself wondering what tomorrow might bring, and it had been a very long time since tomorrow had promised anything but more of the same. True to his word, Kieran McCoy arrived at the store at precisely 7:30 the next morning. Willa, who had been up since 5, was already deep into her morning routine, shelves dusted, floor swept, new merchandise arranged, and the first customers of the day served. The bell above the door jangled as Kieran entered, hat in hand, looking refreshed after a night's rest. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was neatly combed, and he'd exchanged yesterday's trail clothes for clean work attire, a simple button-down shirt, sturdy trousers, and well-worn boots. "Good morning, Miss Sutton," he greeted her, his voice carrying across the store where she was helping Mrs. Miller select fabric for new curtains. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. McCoy. I'll be with you in just a moment." Willa finished with her customer, carefully cutting and wrapping the chosen fabric before making her way over to him. "Thank you for coming as promised." "A man's word should be something he keeps," Kieran replied simply. "Would you like to show me those shelves and steps you mentioned?" Willa led him through the store to the back storeroom, conscious of the curious glances from the few customers browsing the merchandise. Boys might be growing, but it was still small enough that a new face, especially a male one paying attention to the town's spinster shopkeeper, would cause ripples of interest. The storeroom was organized but cramped, with shelves lining 3 walls, many sagging under the weight of goods. "These were built by my father 20 years ago," Willa explained. "They've served well, but as you can see, they're starting to give way. I've been propping them up with whatever's handy, but it's becoming a hazard." Kieran examined the nearest shelf, running his hands over the wood, testing joints and supports with a practiced eye. "Good pine, but the supports weren't built for this much weight. I can rebuild them stronger, add proper bracing." He moved methodically around the room, assessing each shelf unit. "Would take me about a week, working a few hours each day. I could do it early mornings before you open or evenings after you close, so as not to disrupt your business." "That's very considerate," Willa said, surprised by his thoughtfulness. Most men she dealt with in business matters tended to assume their work took priority over her schedule. "Evenings would be best, I think. I close at 6, except on Saturdays when I stay open until 8 for the ranch hands who come to town." "Evenings it is, then," Kieran agreed. "Now, about those front steps." They moved outside, where Kieran crouched down to examine the worn wooden steps leading to the store's entrance. Several boards were splintered, and one had a crack running nearly its full length. "These need complete replacing," he said, straightening up. "I'd recommend cedar instead of pine. Lasts longer with all the foot traffic you get. Would take me a day, maybe 2. Best done on a Sunday when you're closed, I expect." Willa nodded. "Yes, though I often use Sundays to catch up on bookkeeping and ordering. You could still do that." "I'll work around you." He stood, brushing dust from his hands. "I'll need to price out the lumber. Jensen's Mercantile on the edge of town carries good stock. I noticed on my way in yesterday." "Albert Jensen is my competitor," Willa said with a small smile. "But his prices on building supplies are fair. I don't stock much beyond basic nails and tools myself." "Then that's where I'll go." Kieran glanced up at the sun. "If you're agreeable to my help, I can price the materials today, start on those shelves tomorrow evening, and tackle the steps this coming Sunday." "That sounds perfect. What would you charge for the work?" Willa asked, moving directly to business. $3 for the shelves, 2 for the steps, plus the cost of materials," he replied promptly. Willa was surprised. The price was more than fair, lower than she'd anticipated. "That seems very reasonable." A corner of his mouth lifted. "I'm not looking to get rich, Miss Sutton. Just to do honest work for honest pay." They shook hands to seal the agreement, and Willa couldn't help noticing how his large, calloused hand engulfed her smaller one, the warmth of his palm a stark contrast to the cool morning air. "I should let you get back to your customers," Kieran said, releasing her hand and stepping back. "I'll see about those supplies and return tomorrow evening at closing time." As he walked away, Willa found herself watching him longer than was strictly necessary. There was something different about Kieran McCoy, a steadiness, a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, but simply existed. It had been a long time since she'd met a man who didn't either treat her as invisible or view her only as a means to acquire her father's store through marriage. The rest of the day passed in its usual routine, though Willa found her thoughts occasionally drifting to her new acquaintance. By the time she locked the store that evening, she had convinced herself that her interest was purely practical. She needed repairs done, and Mr. McCoy seemed competent to do them. Nothing more. The next evening, Kieran arrived promptly at 6, carrying a toolbox and several lengths of lumber. "Good evening, Miss Sutton," he greeted her as the last customer left. "Ready to begin those repairs?" "Indeed, Mr. McCoy," she replied, locking the front door and flipping the sign to closed. "I've cleared some space in the storeroom for you to work." For the next several hours, the sound of hammering and sawing filled the back of the store as Kieran began dismantling and rebuilding the first set of shelves. Willa busied herself with inventory and bookkeeping at the front counter, occasionally bringing him a cup of coffee or answering a question about how she preferred the shelves arranged. Around 9 o'clock, she realized she was hungry and remembered she had some stew left over from her midday meal. "Would you care for some supper, Mr. McCoy?" she called. "Nothing fancy, just leftover beef stew and some biscuits." Kieran emerged from the storeroom, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's mighty kind of you, Miss Sutton, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition. You've been working for hours, and I was about to eat myself." She gestured toward the narrow staircase that led to her apartment above. "I'll just bring it down. Won't take but a moment." When she returned with 2 bowls of stew and a plate of biscuits, she found Kieran had cleared a space at the counter and pulled up 2 stools. "Hope this is acceptable," he said. "Seemed more proper than using your private quarters." "Very thoughtful," Willa acknowledged, setting down the food. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before she ventured. "May I ask what brings you to Boise, Mr. McCoy? Besides delivering my cousin's pie, that is." Kieran smiled at that. "Been moving around for too many years, Miss Sutton. Worked cattle drives in Texas, did some mining in Colorado, even tried my hand at logging up in Oregon for a spell." He took a bite of stew before continuing. "But a man reaches a point where he wants something more permanent. Boise seemed as good a place as any to try putting down roots." "And what did you do before all that wandering?" Willa asked, curious despite herself. A shadow crossed his face briefly. "Fought in the war. Came home to Tennessee to find my parents had passed and the family farm sold for taxes." He shrugged, the gesture somehow conveying years of hardship without complaint. "So I started moving west, picking up skills along the way." "I'm sorry about your family," Willa said softly. "That must have been difficult, coming home to nothing." "It was a long time ago," he replied, though something in his tone suggested the wound wasn't entirely healed. "What about you, Miss Sutton? You mentioned your father built this store. Have you lived in Boise your whole life?" "Nearly," she confirmed. "My parents came here from Pennsylvania when I was just a child, in '49 during the gold rush. Father wasn't interested in mining, though. He saw opportunity in supplying the miners instead." She smiled faintly at the memory. "He always said, in a gold rush, sell shovels." "Wise man," Kieran commented. "And now you run the store alone," Willa nodded. Mother passed 6 years ago, father 3 years after that. I'd been helping in the store since I was old enough to count change, so taking over seemed natural. Still, it can't be easy, a woman running a business alone in these parts. It has its challenges, she admitted. Some of the suppliers try to charge me more than they did my father, and occasionally a customer thinks they can take advantage. But most folks in town have known me all my life, and they're fair enough. They continued talking as they ate, the conversation flowing more easily than Willa would have expected with a man she barely knew. Kieran told stories of his travels, a cattle stampede in Texas, a winter trapped in a mountain cabin during a Colorado blizzard, the magnificent forests of Oregon. In turn, Willa shared tales of Boise's growth from a rough mining camp to a proper town, the characters who had come and gone, and her own small adventures. By the time they finished eating, it was nearly 10 o'clock. "I should let you get some rest," Kieran said, standing and gathering the empty dishes. "I've made good progress on the first set of shelves. Should be able to finish them tomorrow evening." "I'll walk you out," Willa offered, taking the dishes from him. "And thank you for the stories. It's been a while since I've heard first-hand accounts of the world beyond Boise." At the door, Kieran paused. "I enjoyed the evening, Miss Sutton. Your company and your stew were equally welcome." "Willa," she said impulsively. "My friends call me Willa." His eyes, blue as a summer sky, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "And mine call me Kieran. Good night, Willa. I'll see you tomorrow." As she watched him walk down the street toward the boarding house, Willa felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. It had been a long time since she'd enjoyed conversation with a man who treated her as an equal, not just as Old Man Sutton's spinster daughter. Even longer since she'd felt the stirring of interest that now flickered within her. "Don't be foolish," she chided herself as she climbed the stairs to her apartment. "He's just being polite, and he'll be moving on once the work is done." Yet despite her practical self-admonishment, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow evening in a way she hadn't anticipated a simple day in years. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. Kieran would arrive after closing, work on the shelves for several hours, and then they would share a simple meal and conversation. With each passing evening, Willa found herself opening up more, sharing thoughts and feelings she had kept to herself for years. Kieran, too, gradually revealed more of himself, his dreams of someday having a ranch of his own, his love of reading despite limited formal education, the loneliness of years spent wandering. By Saturday, when the last of the storeroom shelves was completed, Willa realized she would miss these evening conversations once the work was done. The thought troubled her more than she cared to admit. "That's the last of them," Kieran announced, stepping back to survey his handiwork. The storeroom had been transformed. The once sagging shelves were now solid and secure, with additional supports that allowed for even more storage space. He'd even added a rolling ladder that could be moved along the wall, allowing Willa to safely reach the highest shelves. "It's magnificent," she breathed, genuinely impressed. "I've never seen such fine craftsmanship, Kieran. You've turned my humble storeroom into something from a fancy city department store." He ducked his head slightly at the praise. "Just applied what I've learned over the years." "Glad you're pleased, more than pleased," Willa assured him. "I'm amazed and grateful." She hesitated, then added, "I was thinking, tomorrow after you finish the front steps, perhaps you might join me for Sunday dinner as a thank you for all your hard work." Kieran's face lit up with a smile that transformed his weathered features. "I'd like that very much, Willa. Thank you." Sunday morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day. Willa woke earlier than usual, feeling a nervous energy she hadn't experienced in years. She spent extra time with her appearance, selecting a dress of soft green calico that she saved for special occasions, and arranging her hair in a style less severe than her usual practical bun. By the time Kieran arrived at 8, she had already prepared a roast for later and set out coffee and fresh-baked cinnamon rolls for their breakfast. "Good morning," he greeted her, hat in hand. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look lovely today, Willa." A blush warmed her cheeks at the simple compliment. "Thank you. I thought we might as well be comfortable while you work. I've brought down some breakfast if you're hungry." They shared the meal companionably before Kieran set to work on the front steps. Willa settled at her desk with the account books, but found it hard to concentrate with the rhythmic sound of Kieran's hammer just outside. Occasionally, she would glance up to see him through the window, his strong arms working steadily, his face set in concentration. By mid-afternoon, the new steps were complete solid cedar planks, perfectly fitted, with a subtle decorative detail along the edges that Willa hadn't expected. "They're beautiful," she said, standing beside him to admire his handiwork. "You didn't have to add the carved edge." "Wanted to," he replied simply. "A store as fine as yours deserves steps to match." The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, warmed her. "Well, I appreciate it. Now let me get that dinner on the table. You must be famished after all that work." They ate in Willa's apartment, the small dining table set with her mother's good china, another touch she'd added without fully examining her motivations. The roast was tender, the vegetables from her small garden plot behind the store fresh and flavorful. Kieran ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting her cooking with genuine enthusiasm. As they lingered over apple pie, not Lizzie's, but Willa's own recipe, their conversation turned personal once again. "May I ask you something, Willa?" Kieran ventured, his expression thoughtful. "Of course." "In all your years in Boise, was there never anyone special? Someone you might have married?" The question, though personal, didn't feel intrusive coming from him. They had shared enough of themselves over the past week that such inquiries seemed natural. "There was someone once," she admitted. "Thomas Harker. He worked for the stage line. We were courting when the war broke out." She paused, old memories surfacing. "He joined up with the Union forces, died at Antietam." "I'm sorry," Kieran said softly. "That must have been devastating." "It was at the time," Willa acknowledged. "I was 20. Thought my heart would never mend. And then Mother fell ill and Father needed help with the store, and somehow life just moved forward without me noticing that the years were passing." She smiled wryly. "Before I knew it, I was 30 and all the men my age were either married or gone, and those returning from elsewhere were looking for younger wives." "Their loss," Kieran said, his gaze steady on her face. "A woman with your intelligence, capability, and kindness is worth 10 of those girls barely out of the schoolroom." Willa felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "And what about you?" she asked, deflecting attention from her own embarrassment. "Surely there must have been women who caught your eye in all your travels," Kieran chuckled softly. "A few, I suppose, but nothing ever came of it, moving around as much as I did. It didn't seem fair to court a woman when I knew I'd likely be gone with the next change in the weather." His expression grew more serious, "And I wanted to be settled, to have something to offer before I thought about taking a wife." "And now," Willa asked before she could stop herself, "are you settled enough now?" Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of possibilities neither had considered before this week. "I believe I might be," Kieran said quietly. "Boise feels right somehow, like a place a man could put down roots and build a life." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken potential, until Willa broke it by standing to clear the dishes. "Let me get these cleaned up." "I'll help," Kieran offered, rising as well. They worked side by side at the small sink, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed plates and cutlery between them. Each contact sent a small thrill through Willa, a sensation she had thought long lost to her. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor of her small apartment, Kieran reluctantly announced it was time for him to leave. "I've taken up your entire Sunday," he said, reaching for his hat. "I should let you rest before tomorrow." At the top of the stairs that led down to the store, he paused. "Willa, I've accepted a position with Jensen at the livery, starting tomorrow. It's good work with fair pay, and he's including a small room at the back of the stable as part of my wages." "That's wonderful news," Willa said, genuinely pleased for him. "Mr. Jensen is fair-minded and honest. You'll do well there." "I hope so." Kieran hesitated, then added, "Being settled means I'll be seeing more of Boise, more of its people." His gaze held hers. "I was wondering if you might allow me to call on you properly. Sunday afternoons, perhaps, or evenings when the store isn't too busy." Willa's heart quickened. "You mean, court me?" The words felt strange on her tongue, a concept she had long ago relegated to her past. "Yes, madam, that's exactly what I mean," Kieran confirmed, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "With your permission, of course." "I'm 32 years old, Kieran," she felt compelled to remind him. "Most would say my courting days are long behind me." "Most would be wrong," he countered firmly. "Age is just a number, Willa. What matters is the person, and I find myself very interested in getting to know you better." The sincerity in his eyes banished any doubts she might have harbored. "Then yes," she said softly, "I would like that very much." His smile broadened, transforming his face. "I'll see you tomorrow, then. Perhaps I might stop by after work." "I'd like that," Willa agreed, suddenly feeling as shy as a girl receiving her first caller. Kieran reached for her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture both old-fashioned and thrilling. "Until tomorrow, Willa Sutton." After he left, Willa stood at her window, watching his figure disappear down the darkening street. Her hand still tingled where his lips had touched it, and a bubble of unexpected happiness expanded in her chest. "Sometimes second chances come when we least expect them," she murmured, remembering Lizzie's message. Perhaps her cousin had seen something in Kieran McCoy that she thought would suit Willa. If so, Lizzie's intuition had been remarkably accurate. For the first time in many years, Willa went to bed with a sense of anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Kieran's smile and the promise it held. True to his word, Kieran began courting Willa in earnest. His work at the livery kept him busy during the days, but most evenings found him at Sutton's general store, sometimes helping with inventory or heavy lifting. Other times simply sitting and talking with Willa after closing. On Sundays, when both their businesses were closed, they explored Boise and its surroundings together, picnics by the river, rides into the foothills on horses borrowed from the livery, or simply walks through town where Willa would point out buildings and landmarks, sharing the history she had witnessed firsthand. October gave way to November, and as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, their feelings for each other deepened. Willa found herself looking forward to the jingle of the shop bell that signaled Kieran's arrival each evening. For his part, Kieran seemed to grow more settled and content with each passing week, his wanderer's restlessness gradually replaced by a man building a future. The town noticed, of course. Boise was still small enough that the courtship of Willa Sutton by the newcomer Kieran McCoy provided ample fodder for gossip. Some, like Mrs. Patterson and the kindly Reverend Thomas, approved wholeheartedly. Others, particularly mothers with unmarried daughters, were less enthusiastic about the handsome newcomer setting his sights on the town spinster. "People are talking," Willa mentioned one evening as she and Kieran sat by the fire in her small sitting room above the store. The weather had turned bitter, with an early snow blanketing the town. "Let them talk," Kieran replied, unconcerned. He was whittling a small figure from a piece of cedar, his large hands surprisingly deft with the delicate work. "What matters is what we think, not the town gossips." "And what do you think, Kieran McCoy?" Willa asked, her tone light though her heart beat faster at her own boldness. He set aside his carving and looked at her, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. "I think you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. I think meeting you was the best fortune I've had in a life that's seen more than its share of hard times." He reached across to take her hand. "And I think I'm falling in love with you, Willa Sutton." The words, spoken so plainly and honestly, caught her off guard. Despite the growing closeness between them, despite the increasing warmth and frequency of their touches, neither had put such feelings into words before now. "Kieran," she began, her voice catching. "You don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. I'm not a man who believes in hiding his feelings when they're important." Willa squeezed his hand, finding her courage. "I feel the same," she admitted softly. "I never thought, at my age after so long alone, that I could feel this way again, but I do. I'm falling in love with you too." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and tender, a promise rather than a demand. And when they parted, Willa felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. As November turned to December, their courtship continued to blossom despite the harsh Idaho winter. Kieran proved himself not just at the livery, where his way with horses quickly made him indispensable to Mr. Jensen, but also around town. When the heavy snows caused the roof of the church to partially collapse, Kieran was among the first to organize repairs. When the Collins family lost their barn to fire, he helped lead the effort to rebuild before the worst of winter set in. His generosity and hard work earned him the respect of even the most skeptical townspeople. For Willa, watching the man she was coming to love integrate himself into the community she had known all her life was a joy she had never expected to experience. After years of believing love had passed her by, she found herself caught up in its thrall, rediscovering feelings she had locked away after Thomas's death. Christmas approached, bringing with it the town's annual holiday festival. Despite the cold, Boise's Main Street was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and the community hall was transformed with candles and holly for the Christmas Eve dance. "Will you accompany me to the dance?" Kieran asked Willa as they shared supper one evening a week before Christmas. "I'm told it's the social event of the year in Boise." "It is," Willa confirmed. "Though I haven't attended in years, not since Father passed, it didn't seem right to go alone." "Then this year you won't be alone," Kieran promised. "Though I should warn you, I'm not the most accomplished dancer." Willa laughed. "Neither am I, so we'll match well enough." The night of the dance arrived crisp and clear, stars brilliant in the black velvet sky. Willa wore her best dress, a deep burgundy wool that she had refreshed with new lace at the collar and cuffs. She had spent extra time with her hair, arranging it in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun, with soft curls framing her face. When Kieran arrived to escort her, he wore a new suit, his first, he admitted sheepishly, bought specially for the occasion. The dark fabric emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, and he had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair. "You look beautiful," he told her, his eyes warm with admiration. "And you are the most handsome man in Idaho territory," she replied, meaning it wholeheartedly. They walked arm in arm through the snowy streets to the community hall, where lanterns blazed and the sounds of music and laughter spilled out into the night. Inside, the hall was transformed. Evergreen garlands hung from the rafters, interspersed with paper stars and red ribbons. Candles glowed in hurricane lamps on every table, and a massive Christmas tree, decorated with handmade ornaments and real candles, dominated one corner. "It's magical," Willa murmured, taking it all in. Many heads turned as they entered. Willa was conscious of the stares and whispers, but Kieran's steady presence beside her gave her confidence. They moved among the townspeople, greeting friends and acquaintances, accepting cups of spiced cider from the refreshment table. When the music began, Kieran led her to the dance floor. Despite his earlier disclaimer, he proved to be a competent dancer, guiding her through a waltz with sure steps. Willa, who had learned to dance as a girl but had few opportunities to practice in recent years, found herself remembering the steps more easily than she'd anticipated. "You dance beautifully," she told him as they circled the floor. "I had good motivation to learn," he replied with a smile. "A pretty girl in San Antonio took pity on a clumsy cowboy and taught me the basics." Willa laughed. "Then I must thank her someday." They danced several more sets before taking a break for refreshments. As they stood near the punch bowl, Dr. Patterson approached with his wife. "Miss Sutton, Mr. McCoy." The doctor greeted them warmly. "Fine evening, isn't it? Best Christmas dance we've had in years, I'd say." "Indeed it is, Doctor," Willa agreed. "The committee outdid themselves with the decorations. And the company is particularly fine this year," Mrs. Patterson added with a meaningful look between Willa and Kieran. "It's good to see you here, Willa dear. It's been too long since you joined the festivities." "I had excellent motivation this year," Willa replied, echoing Kieran's earlier words. The evening continued, a whirl of music, laughter, and dancing. Willa found herself thoroughly enjoying the celebration, seeing the familiar annual event through new eyes. Everything seemed brighter, more meaningful with Kieran beside her. As midnight approached, Reverend Thomas called for attention. "Friends and neighbors," he announced, "as is our tradition, we will now step outside to welcome Christmas Day beneath God's stars." The entire assembly moved out into the crisp night air, forming a large circle in the town square. The church bell began to toll, counting down the minutes to midnight. Kieran took Willa's hands in his, turning to face her as the crowd around them sang Silent Night. His expression was solemn yet joyful, his eyes reflecting the starlight above. "Willa Sutton," he said, his voice low and intimate despite the crowd surrounding them. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I came to Boise looking for a place to put down roots, and I found so much more. I found you." Willa's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. Around them, the singing continued, but she barely heard it, focused entirely on Kieran's words and the love in his eyes. "I know this is fast," he continued, "and I know some might say we're too old to be starting over, but I don't want to waste another day without you by my side." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." Opening the box, he revealed a simple gold band set with a small, perfect diamond that caught the starlight and seemed to hold it. "Will you marry me, Willa? Make a home with me, build a life together, grow old by my side." Tears filled Willa's eyes, blurring her vision. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Kieran. Yes, I'll marry you." As the church bell tolled midnight, announcing Christmas Day, Kieran slipped the ring onto her finger and drew her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of all the love and hope they had found in each other. Around them, The townspeople broke into applause. Some had noticed what was happening and paused in their singing to watch. Others, realizing what they were witnessing, joined in the celebration. Congratulations surrounded them as they broke apart, both laughing and wiping away tears of joy. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. McCoy-to-be," Kieran murmured against her ear. "Merry Christmas, my love," Willa replied, holding tight to his hand, to the future they would build together. The new year of 1877 began with a flurry of wedding preparations. Willa and Kieran had decided on a February wedding soon enough to satisfy their desire to begin their life together, but allowing time for necessary arrangements. The most pressing question was where they would live. Kieran's room at the livery was far too small for a couple, and while Willa's apartment above the store was comfortable for one, it would be crowded for two, with no room for future expansion. The solution presented itself unexpectedly when a small property on the outskirts of town came up for sale, a modest 2-bedroom house with a barn and 5 acres of land, enough for a garden, a few horses, and possibly a small herd of cattle down the line. It was within reasonable riding distance of both the store and the livery, offering the perfect compromise. "It's more than I ever dreamed of having," Willa confessed as they walked the property after making an offer. "A store of my own and a home with land." "It's just the beginning," Kieran promised, his arm around her shoulders as they surveyed what would soon be theirs. "We'll build something good here, you and I." The wedding itself was a simple affair, held in Boise's church on a clear, cold February day. Willa wore a new dress of deep blue silk, ordered specially from a catalog, with her mother's lace veil. Kieran, resplendent in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with an expression of such joy and love that several of the town's most stoic matrons were seen dabbing at their eyes. Reverend Thomas officiated, speaking eloquently of love that comes at unexpected times, of second chances and new beginnings. When Willa and Kieran exchanged their vows, their voices were clear and confident, making promises they both intended to keep for all the days of their lives. The reception afterward, held in the community hall, was a joyful celebration that brought together nearly the entire town. Even those who had initially been skeptical of the match between the town's spinster shopkeeper and the wandering cowboy had come to appreciate the genuine love that existed between them. Mrs. Patterson, who had appointed herself unofficial guardian of the event, made sure everything ran smoothly, from the wedding feast contributed by many of Boise's finest cooks to the dancing that continued well into the evening. As dusk fell, the newlyweds slipped away to begin their life together in their new home. Kieran surprised Willa by literally sweeping her off her feet to carry her over the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. McCoy," he said, setting her down in the front room that friends had decorated with flowers and candles for their return. "Home," Willa repeated, leaning into his embrace. "I like the sound of that." In the months that followed, they settled into a rhythm of life together. Willa continued to run the store, though she hired young Jenny Thomas, the Reverend's daughter, to help 3 days a week, allowing her more time at home. Kieran's position at the livery expanded to include training horses, a skill at which he excelled. In the evenings and on Sundays, they worked on their home and land together, planting a vegetable garden, repairing fences, and making plans for the future. They wrote to Lizzie in Denver, thanking her for her part in bringing them together. "Your pie and your promise changed my life," Willa wrote. "Kieran says to tell you that if you ever need a favor, you have only to ask, as he owes his happiness to your matchmaking skills." Lizzie's reply came a month later, full of delight at their news and an invitation to visit Denver when they could. "I knew the moment I met Mr. McCoy that he was exactly what you needed," "Dear cousin," she wrote, "some people just belong together, and sometimes they need a little nudge to find each other." Spring turned to summer, and with it came news that thrilled them both. Willa was expecting a child, due in late winter. At 33, she had long ago given up the dream of motherhood, believing that particular blessing had passed her by along with love. Now, miraculously, both had found her. Kieran's joy at the news was boundless. He immediately set to work converting the small second bedroom into a nursery, crafting a cradle from cedar with the same loving attention he had given to the store steps all those months ago. As Willa's condition became obvious, the town rallied around them with the practical support that frontier communities were known for. Mrs. Patterson organized a quilting bee to make baby blankets. Dr. Patterson assured them both that despite Willa's age, she was healthy and strong, with every expectation of a safe delivery. The women of Boise shared advice, remedies for morning sickness, and hand-me-down baby clothes, while the men slapped Kieran on the back and offered cigars in anticipation of the blessed event. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" Kieran asked one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Willa, now visibly pregnant, leaned against his shoulder, his arm protectively around her. "Never," she admitted. "I had resigned myself to a different path. A good one. I was content with the store, with my independence, but I never dreamed I could have this too." She placed his hand over the swell of her abdomen, where their child grew strong and active. "You brought pie and promise into my life, Kieran McCoy, and everything changed." "Lizzie deserves some credit," he reminded her with a chuckle. "She was quite determined that I should meet you, you know. Made me promise 3 times that I'd deliver that pie personally, not just leave it with a neighbor if you were busy." "Remind me to thank her properly when they visit next summer," Willa said, smiling at the thought of finally seeing her cousin again after so many years. "Though I think you deserve most of the credit. You could have delivered the pie and gone on your way, but you stayed. You saw something in me worth staying for." "I saw everything worth staying for," Kieran corrected gently. "A woman of strength and kindness with a mind as sharp as her spirit. How could I not fall in love with you?" Their child, a robust boy they named James Thomas McCoy, was born on a snowy February night in 1878, almost exactly 1 year after their wedding. Dr. Patterson pronounced him perfect in every way, with his father's blue eyes and what promised to be his mother's honey-brown hair. Parenthood brought new joys and challenges to their lives. Willa, who had managed a successful business for years, found that an infant operated on a schedule all his own, with needs that couldn't be organized in ledger books or addressed with efficient inventory systems. Kieran, whose wandering life had rarely included prolonged contact with children, discovered depths of patience he hadn't known he possessed during long nights walking the floor with a colicky baby. Together, they navigated the adjustment, supporting each other through exhaustion and uncertainty, celebrating each small milestone: the first smile, the first laugh, the first time little James slept through the night, allowing his grateful parents to do the same. As James grew from infant to toddler, their family and business interests expanded as well. Kieran, with his skill in horse training, had gained a reputation that spread beyond Boise. Ranchers from surrounding areas sought his expertise, willing to pay premium prices for his services. With the extra income, they were able to expand their property, purchasing an adjacent 10 acres when it came available. Willa's store continued to thrive under her careful management. She had a knack for anticipating what the growing town would need, ordering inventory that often sold out within days of arrival. Jenny Thomas, now a permanent employee, proved to have a similar business sense, allowing Willa to reduce her hours at the store as their family needs increased. In the spring of 1880, their family grew again with the arrival of their daughter, Elizabeth Rose McCoy, named for Willa's cousin and Kieran's mother. Little Lizzie, as they called her, was as different from her brother as day from night, where James was boisterous and adventurous. Lizzie was thoughtful and observant, taking in the world with serious eyes, before breaking into smiles that melted her parents' hearts. Life settled into a pleasant routine. Mornings began early, with Kieran tending to their growing collection of animals: horses, milk cows, chickens, before heading to the livery. Willa would see to the children and household, before either taking them to the store with her for a few hours or leaving them in the capable hands of Mrs. Jensen, who had become something of a surrogate grandmother to the McCoy children. Evenings and Sundays were family time, with games, stories, and, as the children grew older, lessons in riding, gardening, and the practical skills needed for frontier life. Kieran proved to be a patient teacher, whether showing James how to groom a horse properly or helping Lizzie plant her own small flower garden beside the house. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Boys grew as well, the small frontier town gradually transforming into a proper city as the territory moved toward statehood. The Sutton General Store, now officially renamed McCoy's Mercantile, expanded to meet the needs of the growing population. In 1887, when James was 9 and Lizzie 7, their family was completed with the surprise arrival of another son, William Frederick McCoy. At 43, Willa had believed her childbearing years were behind her, but little Will, as they called him, proved to be a blessing they hadn't known to wish for: a merry, curious child who brought fresh laughter into their home, just as his older siblings were beginning to outgrow childhood games. Throughout these years of growth and change, the foundation of their family remained the deep and abiding love between Willa and Kieran. The passion that had surprised them both in the early days of their marriage mellowed into something richer and more profound: a partnership of equals who faced life's challenges and celebrated its joys together. "You remember the day we met?" Kieran asked one evening as they sat on their expanded porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set. James was teaching his younger siblings a game involving a ball and elaborate rules that seemed to change with every round. "How could I forget?" Willa replied, smiling at the memory. "You arrived with pie and promise just as the sun was setting, much like now. You looked so beautiful standing there on the porch of the store, broom in hand," Kieran recalled, reaching over to take her hand. "I'd heard about you from Lizzie, of course, but she didn't mention that her spinster cousin had the most expressive brown eyes I'd ever seen. And she didn't tell me her handsome cowboy acquaintance had a smile that could charm the scales off a snake," Willa countered, laughing. "I think I was half in love with you by the time you finished those storeroom shelves." "Only half," Kieran pretended offense. "I was completely smitten by our first shared meal." "We've been blessed," Willa said more seriously, watching as James dramatically fell to the ground, prompting peals of laughter from his younger siblings. "More than I ever dared hope for. And we're just getting started," Kieran assured her, squeezing her hand. "James is already talking about attending that new college in Moscow when he's old enough. Lizzie's got a mind for business that might put even you to shame, and who knows what young Will might become. Whatever they choose, they'll have our support," Willa said firmly. "Just as we've supported each other." As dusk deepened into night, they called the children in for supper. The family gathered around the large oak table that Kieran had crafted years ago when James was a baby. now marked with the evidence of family life's small nicks from countless meals. A burn mark from a hot pan set down too quickly. Initials secretly carved by little fingers and discovered too late to prevent. Willa looked around the table at the faces of those she loved most in the world. Kieran, his dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, but his blue eyes as warm and kind as ever. James, growing tall and strong, with his father's practical nature and his mother's head for figures. Lizzie, with her thoughtful expression and quick mind. Little Will, still young enough to believe the world held nothing but wonder and possibility. This was the future she had never dared imagine for herself on that autumn evening when a travel-worn cowboy had appeared at her store with a pie and a message from her cousin. This was the life that had seemed beyond reach for a woman who thought love had passed her by. "What are you thinking, my love?" Kieran asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the best journeys begin with unexpected deliveries," she replied with a smile. "And that I am grateful every day for a cousin who knew exactly what I needed, even when I didn't know myself." "And what was that?" Kieran asked, though after 15 years of marriage he knew the answer. "A second chance at love," Willa said simply. "A chance to discover that it's never too late for promises to be fulfilled." As the family bowed their heads for grace, Willa's heart was full with the knowledge that what had begun with a pie and a promise had grown into a life richer and more satisfying than she could ever have imagined. The woman who thought love had passed her by had found it waiting, after all, in the smile of a cowboy who saw not a spinster shopkeeper, but a woman worthy of love, partnership, and all the joys that came with both. In the years that followed, the McCoy family continued to thrive in Boise as Idaho achieved statehood and the turn of the century approached. Their children grew into adults who made their parents proud. James eventually did attend the university in Moscow, returning to Boise with knowledge of modern agricultural techniques that he applied to the family's expanded ranch operations. Lizzie, with her mother's business acumen, took over management of the mercantile, expanding it into one of Boise's most successful businesses. Young Will, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by developing artistic talents that eventually led him to study in San Francisco, before returning to become Boise's first professional photographer. Through it all, Kieran and Willa remained the heart of the family, their love providing a foundation of strength and stability. Their home, expanded over the years to accommodate growing children and eventually visiting grandchildren, became known throughout the community as a place of warmth and welcome. When Lizzie Sutton Harrison finally visited from Denver in 1892, accompanied by her husband and 2 of their grown children, the cousins' reunion was filled with laughter, tears, and the sharing of 15 years' worth of stories. The pie they shared that evening, apple with cinnamon, of course tasted of memories, promises kept, and dreams fulfilled. "I knew he was the one for you," Lizzie confessed to Willa as they sat together on the porch swing, watching their husbands discuss the merits of different horse breeds with all the seriousness of diplomats negotiating treaties. "The moment Kieran McCoy walked into our church social in Denver, I thought to myself, there goes the man who could make my Willa happy." "Your matchmaking skills are unparalleled," Willa acknowledged with a laugh, "though I'm curious what made you so certain." Lizzie considered the question thoughtfully. "He listened," she said finally. "Most men talk and expect women to listen, but Kieran truly heard what people were saying. And when I mentioned my spinster cousin in Idaho who ran a store and had the kindest heart in the territory, he asked questions about you, real questions, not just polite conversation. I could see he was interested in who you were, not just whether you were pretty or marriageable." And then you asked him to deliver a pie, Willa said, smiling at the memory. It was a test, Lizzie admitted with a mischievous grin. If he was the kind of man who would go out of his way to deliver a home-baked pie from one woman to another, just because it represented a promise between cousins, then he was exactly the kind of man you deserved. I'm glad he passed your test, Willa said softly, watching as Kieran demonstrated something to their youngest son, his hands moving expressively as Will nodded in understanding. Even after all these years, the sight of her husband, his strong profile, the gentle way he spoke to their children, the occasional glance he still sent her way that held all the love in the world could make her heart skip a beat. So am I, Lizzie agreed, following her gaze. You deserved all of this happiness, Willa. You always did. As the evening deepened into night and the family gathered inside for music and conversation, Willa found herself beside Kieran on the sofa, his arm around her shoulders in the comfortable familiarity of long marriage. Happy? He asked quietly, his lips close to her ear. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his embrace, and she was. The woman who had once thought love had passed her by had found it in abundance in the steadfast heart of a cowboy who brought her a pie and a promise, in the laughter of children and grandchildren, in a life built day by day with the man who had seen in her all the possibilities she had stopped seeing in herself. It was a life she wouldn't trade for any other, a journey that had begun with an unexpected delivery on an ordinary autumn evening, and continued through all the seasons of love that followed.